I'm Claire Lee, 73 years old, and yesterday the most humiliating thing happened to me at Prestige Motors downtown. I was treated like I was invisible, then laughed at when I tried to buy a car with cash. But what happened when I walked into that same dealership the next morning was even worse for them. If you've ever been judged by your appearance or dismissed because of your age, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this kind of disrespect. You see, most people look at me and see what they expect to see: a small, gray-haired woman in comfortable shoes and a simple cardigan, carrying a worn leather purse that's seen better decades. They see someone's grandmother, maybe a retired teacher or librarian living on a fixed income. They don't see the woman who started with nothing and built an empire that spans 3 states. They don't see the CEO who signs their paychecks, the investor who could buy their companies with pocket change, or the philanthropist whose donations have funded half the community projects in this city. But yesterday at that car dealership, I got a harsh reminder of how the world sees me versus who I really am. Let me take you back to where this all started, because understanding my journey makes what happened yesterday even more unbelievable. 52 years ago, I was a 21-year-old single mother working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over my daughter's head. I met my late husband Isaac at the laundromat on Elm Street, of all places. It was 2 in the morning, and I was there because it was the only time I could squeeze laundry into my schedule between my day job at the telephone company, my evening shift waitressing at Murphy's Diner, and my weekend work cleaning offices. I was exhausted sitting on one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs, watching my clothes tumble in the ancient machines, when this kind-looking man with gentle brown eyes and calloused hands sat down beside me. Isaac was different from any man I'd ever met. He didn't try to impress me with big talk or smooth lines. Instead, he offered me half of his peanut butter sandwich and asked if I was okay because I looked tired. When I told him about my 3 jobs and my 4-year-old daughter Sarah waiting at home with my neighbor, he didn't run. Most men would have. Instead, he started showing up at the laundromat every Tuesday night, bringing coffee in thermos bottles and helping me fold clothes while we talked about everything from our dreams to our fears. He told me about his job at the construction company, how he was saving every penny to start his own contracting business someday. I told him about my secret dream of having my own business, though I had no idea what kind. We were both dreamers with empty pockets but full hearts. Those early years with Isaac were the foundation of everything I became. He didn't just marry me, he adopted Sarah and loved her like she was his own blood. Together, we scraped and saved and sacrificed for 5 years until Isaac finally had enough money to buy his first work truck and start Lee Construction. I kept working my jobs to pay the bills while he built the business, often coming home covered in sawdust and paint, his face lit up with excitement about the latest project he'd landed. Our little apartment above the bakery on Maple Street smelled like fresh bread every morning and sawdust every evening. We ate more beans and rice than I care to remember, but we were building something together, and that made every sacrifice worth it. By our 7th year of marriage, Lee Construction was thriving. Isaac had a crew of 6 men, more work than he could handle, and a reputation for quality that had customers calling us instead of us chasing them. That's when I made the suggestion that changed our lives forever. I was still working at the telephone company, and I'd been watching how the business operated, learning about accounting and customer service and management. I told Isaac that if we were going to grow, we needed systems, proper bookkeeping, and someone handling the business side full-time. I volunteered to quit my job and become his business manager, even though it meant giving up the steady paycheck that had kept us afloat for so long. The golden period of our lives lasted nearly 20 years. Isaac handled the construction side while I built the business infrastructure. I discovered I had a natural talent for numbers, for reading people, and for spotting opportunities that others missed. When the city announced plans for a new shopping complex, I convinced Isaac to bid on the project even though it was 3 times bigger than anything we'd done before. We got the contract, and it launched us into commercial construction. When I noticed that many of our clients were struggling to get financing for their projects, I researched how to get into development ourselves. We started buying land, developing properties, and selling them at a profit. Our typical day during those golden years started at 5:30 in the morning with coffee on our back porch, watching the sunrise and planning our day. Isaac would head to the job sites while I went to the office we'd built behind our new house on Willow Creek Drive. Lunch meant meeting at whatever diner was closest to his current project, where we'd share a sandwich and dream about the future. We talked about expanding into other cities, maybe even other states. We planned the house we'd build when we retired, complete with a workshop for Isaac and a garden for me. We felt invincible, like nothing could touch the life we'd built together. But life has a way of reminding you that nothing lasts forever. The first sign that something was wrong came during one of our usual lunch meetings. Isaac ordered his regular turkey club but barely touched it, pushing the food around his plate while I talked about a new development opportunity in the next county. When I asked if he was feeling okay, he brushed it off, saying he was just tired from the early mornings. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the subtle changes, how he started needing more breaks during the day, how he'd sometimes pause mid-sentence and look confused, how he began asking me to handle conversations with clients because he was having trouble finding the right words. The morning that changed everything started like any other. I was reviewing contracts in my home office while Isaac prepared for a client meeting about a major renovation project downtown. He'd been working on the proposal for weeks, and landing this contract would set us up beautifully for the next 2 years. He kissed me goodbye at 8:15, promising to call me after the meeting to celebrate what he was sure would be another success. But the call I got 3 hours later wasn't the celebration I was expecting. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Patricia Williams at Mercy General Hospital. Her tone was professionally gentle, the kind medical professionals perfect when delivering life-altering news. She told me that Isaac had collapsed during his client meeting, that he'd been rushed to the hospital, and that I needed to come immediately. The drive to the hospital felt both endless and too short. Part of me wanted to race there as fast as possible, while another part wanted to stay in the car forever, because as long as I was driving, I didn't have to face whatever was waiting for me. When I arrived at the hospital, Dr. Williams explained that Isaac had suffered a massive stroke. The technical terms she used washed over me like a foreign language, but the meaning was clear. The man I'd built a life with, the partner who'd shared every dream and challenge for over 25 years, might never be the same again. As I sat in the sterile waiting room, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and the sound of machines beeping in the distance, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life was about to change. The woman who walked into that hospital was the same person I'd been that morning, but the woman who would eventually walk out would be someone entirely different. Over the next several months, as Isaac fought his way through rehabilitation and recovery, I would discover strengths I never knew I had, and face challenges that would test everything I believed about myself. I would learn that building a business with a partner is entirely different from running it alone, that the community we thought we were part of had some very different ideas about what a widow should do with her husband's company. And that starting over at 53 was both the hardest and most empowering thing I'd ever done. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let me tell you about the family dynamics that made everything infinitely more complicated. You see, Isaac had 2 brothers, Daniel and Robert, who had always resented our success. When we were struggling in those early years, they'd been quick to offer unsolicited advice and criticism. When we started thriving, they changed their tune to entitlement and expectation. Daniel worked sporadically in construction and had always believed he deserved a piece of Lee Construction because it carried the family name. Robert had a series of failed business ventures and was constantly approaching us for loans he never intended to repay. During Isaac's recovery, these 2 men showed their true colors in ways that still make my hands shake with anger. While I was splitting my time between the hospital, running the business, and trying to keep our lives from falling apart, Daniel actually had the audacity to suggest that since Isaac couldn't work anymore, the construction company should be turned over to him as the next male heir in the family. Robert went one step further, bringing lawyers to the hospital to pressure Isaac into signing documents that would give them control of our assets while he was still struggling to form complete sentences. I'll never forget the conversation I had with Dr. Williams about Isaac's prognosis. She was honest in the way that good doctors are, explaining that while Isaac had made remarkable progress, he would likely never again have the mental acuity needed to run a complex business. She suggested I start thinking about the future, about what I wanted my life to look like, and about whether I was prepared to take on challenges I'd never faced alone. That night, sitting beside Isaac's hospital bed and watching him sleep, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. I wasn't going to let anyone take away what we'd built together, and I was going to prove that a 53-year-old woman could not only run a construction company, but could expand it beyond anything Isaac and I had imagined. The day I walked back into the Lee construction office as the sole owner and operator, I could feel the skepticism radiating from our employees, clients, and competitors. The construction industry in 1985 was still very much a man's world, and the idea of a woman running a major contracting company was met with everything from polite doubt to outright hostility. I remember the first client meeting I attended alone, how the room of men looked at me like I was an interesting novelty, asking questions about my background and qualifications that they never would have asked Isaac. But I'd been watching and learning for years, and I knew our business inside and out. Over the next 15 years, I didn't just maintain Lee Construction, I transformed it into Lee Development Group, a multi-million-dollar enterprise with projects across 3 states. I added property management, real estate investment, and commercial development to our services. I bought out 2 competing construction companies and opened branch offices in neighboring cities. I developed 3 shopping centers, 2 apartment complexes, and a business park that attracted companies from across the region. By the time I was ready to step back from day-to-day operations at 68, Lee Development Group was one of the largest privately held development companies in the state. The secret to my success wasn't just business acumen, though I developed plenty of that over the years. It was the lesson Isaac had taught me from the very beginning: treat people with respect, deliver quality work, and always keep your word. I paid my employees well, treated my subcontractors fairly, and built relationships with clients that lasted decades. I also learned to use people's underestimation of me as an advantage. While competitors were dismissing me as Isaac's widow playing at business, I was quietly securing the best contracts, hiring the most talented people, and building a reputation for excellence that spoke louder than any doubts about my gender or age. But success in business doesn't protect you from the everyday assumptions people make based on appearance. Even as I was running a company worth millions, I still encountered situations where people saw an older woman and made snap judgments about my capabilities, my financial status, and my worth. I learned to navigate these situations with grace most of the time, understanding that educating people about their biases was more productive than getting angry. Most of the time. Yesterday was not one of those times. Yesterday started as a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. I decided it was time to replace my 15-year-old sedan with something more reliable, nothing fancy, just a dependable car that would serve me well in my retirement years. I'd been driving the same modest Honda for years because it was practical and economical, not because I couldn't afford something better. After 5 decades of watching every penny, old habits die hard, and I've always believed that the car gets you from point A to point B, regardless of how much you spend on it. I chose Prestige Motors because they had good reviews online and carried several brands known for reliability. I'd done my research, knew exactly what I wanted, and had even called ahead to confirm they had the specific model in stock. I arrived at the dealership wearing my usual comfortable attire, navy blue slacks, a cream-colored sweater, sensible walking shoes, and my favorite cardigan that Sarah had given me for my birthday 3 years ago. My gray hair was neatly styled in the same bob cut I'd worn for 20 years, and I carried my trusty leather purse that had seen me through countless business meetings and family gatherings. The moment I walked through the glass doors of Prestige Motors, I could feel the change in atmosphere. The young man at the reception desk, who had been chatting animatedly with a couple looking at luxury SUVs, barely glanced in my direction. I stood there for several minutes, waiting for someone to acknowledge my presence, while salespeople walked past me to greet other customers who had arrived after me. Finally, a young woman named Jessica approached, but her body language suggested she was doing so reluctantly, like she'd drawn the short straw. Jessica's attitude was professionally polite but clearly dismissive. When I told her I was interested in purchasing a car that day, she asked if I was looking for something for my grandson or if I was just browsing. When I clarified that I was shopping for myself, she steered me toward the oldest, most basic models on the lot, explaining features to me as if I'd never seen a car before. She spoke slowly and loudly, the way people sometimes talk to elderly individuals they assume are hard of hearing or confused. Despite the fact that I was speaking clearly and asking specific informed questions about warranty coverage, safety ratings, and maintenance requirements. The situation deteriorated when I found the exact car I wanted, a mid-level sedan with good safety features and reasonable fuel economy. When I told Jessica I'd like to purchase it, she asked if I needed to call my son or husband to discuss it first. When I assured her I was perfectly capable of making my own decisions, she asked about financing options with the tone of someone who doubted I could qualify for a loan. That's when I mentioned that I intended to pay cash for the vehicle, assuming this would expedite the process and demonstrate that I was a serious buyer ready to complete the transaction immediately. Instead of the professional excitement you'd expect from a salesperson hearing about a cash sale, Jessica's expression shifted to barely concealed skepticism. She asked if I was sure I understood what cash purchase meant, explaining that the car I was interested in cost $32,000. When I confirmed that I understood the price and was prepared to pay the full amount immediately, she excused herself to check with her manager about the availability of the vehicle, leaving me standing alone on the showroom floor while she whispered urgently with a group of other employees. What happened next still makes my cheeks burn with humiliation and my heart race with anger. From across the showroom, I could hear pieces of their conversation, questions about whether I understood how much money I was talking about, speculation about whether I was experiencing some form of dementia, and suggestions that they should call Adult Protective Services because clearly an elderly woman carrying around that much cash might be the victim of a scam or might be making impulsive decisions due to cognitive decline. The manager, a middle-aged man named Derek Peterson, according to his business card, approached me with the kind of patronizing smile usually reserved for children and confused tourists. He gently explained that purchasing a car was a big decision that shouldn't be rushed, especially for someone in my demographic. He suggested I go home and think about it, maybe discuss it with my family, and return another time with a relative who could help me navigate the process. He actually used the phrase "someone like you" when explaining that car purchases could be overwhelming for elderly customers who weren't familiar with modern technology and financing options. When I insisted that I was perfectly capable of making this decision and asked to speak with someone authorized to complete the sale, Derek exchanged glances with Jessica and another salesman who had joined their little conference. He then asked if I would mind if he called my emergency contact to verify that I was supposed to be making such a large purchase, suggesting that family members sometimes needed to be involved when elderly individuals were spending significant amounts of money. The implication was clear. They believed I was either incompetent or potentially being exploited, and they were positioning themselves as protectors, saving me from my own poor judgment. The final straw came when Derek asked to see the cash I claimed to have, saying they needed to verify that it was legitimate currency and not counterfeit bills, since elderly people were often targeted by scam artists who gave them fake money. When I opened my purse to show him the envelope containing the cashier's check I'd obtained from my bank that morning, along with some cash for incidental expenses, he actually chuckled and said something about how I must have been saving my Social Security checks for a very long time to accumulate that much money. That comment, delivered with a smug smile that suggested he thought he was being cleverly humorous, was the moment I realized this wasn't just poor customer service or ageist assumptions. This was deliberate humiliation, a group of people who had decided I was an amusing diversion, a little old lady with delusions of grandeur who provided entertainment value for their otherwise boring Tuesday afternoon. I could see other customers glancing in our direction, some looking sympathetic but most appearing amused by the spectacle of the confused elderly woman trying to buy a car she obviously couldn't afford. I left Prestige Motors that day without purchasing a vehicle, but I did leave with something far more valuable: absolute clarity about what I needed to do next. As I sat in my old Honda in the dealership parking lot, taking deep breaths and trying to calm my racing heart, I made a phone call that would change the trajectory of several careers and possibly the future of Prestige Motors itself. I called my personal assistant Margaret and asked her to prepare a comprehensive file on Prestige Motors, including ownership structure, financial standing, employee roster, and any business relationships they might have with other companies in my portfolio. You see, What Derek Peterson and his team didn't know was that Claire Lee, the little old lady they just humiliated and dismissed, was also Claire Lee, the primary investor in the holding company that owned the land their dealership sat on, the construction company that had built their showroom, and the development group that managed the entire automotive complex where Prestige Motors was located. They had just treated their landlord like a confused grandmother, and tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day for everyone involved. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called an emergency meeting of my executive team. Margaret arranged for my attorney, my accountant, and my head of property management to meet me at my home office at 7 o'clock. Over coffee and the chocolate chip cookies I'd stress-baked after returning from the dealership, I laid out exactly what had happened and asked for a complete review of all business relationships between Lee Development Group and Prestige Motors. What we discovered was even more interesting than I'd anticipated. Not only did my company own the land and building that housed Prestige Motors, but Lee Development Group had also provided the construction loan that allowed them to expand their showroom 2 years earlier. Additionally, the holding company I chaired was the primary investor in the regional automotive group that held Prestige Motors franchise agreements. In essence, the people who had dismissed me as an incompetent elderly woman were financially connected to me at multiple levels, and none of them had any idea that the little gray-haired lady in the cardigan controlled significant aspects of their business environment. My attorney Patricia Chen suggested that we handle the situation through formal channels, perhaps with a letter expressing concerns about discriminatory practices and requesting policy changes. My accountant, Robert Martinez, recommended a financial review of their lease terms to ensure they were meeting all obligations under their agreements with our holding company. But my head of property management, a sharp woman named Linda Foster who had been with me for 15 years, had a different suggestion. She recommended that I return to the dealership the next morning, not as a customer but as the representative of Lee Development Group conducting a surprise inspection of the property and meeting with management about lease compliance and customer service standards. The more I thought about Linda's suggestion, the more I liked it. This wasn't about revenge, though I'd be lying if I said the thought of seeing Derek Peterson's face when he realized who I was didn't bring me a certain amount of satisfaction. This was about education, about creating a teachable moment that might prevent other elderly customers from experiencing the humiliation I'd endured. It was also about accountability, about ensuring that businesses operating in properties I controlled maintained the standards of professionalism and respect that I expected from all my tenants. I spent that evening preparing for what would either be a productive business meeting or a very uncomfortable confrontation. I reviewed Prestige Motors' lease agreement, noting specific clauses about maintaining professional standards and adhering to fair business practices. I researched anti-discrimination laws related to age and prepared talking points about inclusive customer service policies. I also selected my outfit carefully, a tailored navy blue suit, professional pumps, and my late husband's gold watch that had become my signature piece in business settings. Tomorrow, Derek Peterson and his team would meet Claire Lee, the business owner, not Claire Lee, the confused grandmother. The morning of reckoning arrived with unusual clarity and purpose. I woke up at my usual 5:30, but instead of my typical routine of coffee and morning news, I spent extra time preparing for what I knew would be a pivotal day. I reviewed my notes one final time, confirmed that Margaret had prepared all necessary documentation, and practiced the speech I'd been mentally composing since leaving the dealership the previous afternoon. This wasn't about humiliating anyone the way I'd been humiliated, it was about creating understanding and ensuring change. I arrived at Prestige Motors at exactly 9 o'clock, accompanied by Linda Foster and carrying a leather portfolio that contained lease documents, property management files, and detailed notes about the previous day's experience. The same young man was working the reception desk, and he greeted us with the kind of professional enthusiasm typically reserved for people who looked like they belonged in an upscale car dealership. When I asked to speak with Derek Peterson about property management matters, we were immediately escorted to his office without question or delay. Derek's office was exactly what I expected: oversized desk, motivational posters about success and achievement, photos of him shaking hands with various local dignitaries, and a wall of sales awards dating back 15 years. He greeted us with a confident smile and firm handshake, clearly assuming we were potential business partners or vendors seeking his cooperation on some profitable venture. He offered coffee, complimented Linda on her professional appearance, and asked how Prestige Motors could be of service to Lee Development Group. The moment of recognition was everything I'd hoped it would be and more. When I introduced myself as Claire Lee, I could see Derek's mind working, trying to place why my name sounded familiar. When I added that I was the principal owner of Lee Development Group and was here to discuss property management concerns, his expression shifted to professional attention. But when I mentioned that I'd been in his showroom the previous day as a customer and had experienced concerning treatment, the color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might need medical attention. To his credit, Derek attempted to maintain his composure, asking if there had been some misunderstanding or communication issue that he could help resolve. When I calmly recounted the previous day's events, citing specific quotes and describing his staff's behavior in detail, he began what appeared to be a carefully rehearsed damage control routine. He apologized for any confusion, suggested that his team might have been trying to protect me from potential financial exploitation, and assured me that Prestige Motors valued customers of all backgrounds and ages. But I wasn't finished. I opened my portfolio and began reviewing specific sections of their lease agreement, particularly clauses related to maintaining professional standards and adhering to fair business practices. I explained that as their landlord, I had certain expectations about how customers were treated in properties I owned, and that discrimination based on age, gender, or perceived economic status was unacceptable and potentially grounds for lease violation. I also mentioned that Lee Development Group worked with numerous businesses throughout the region, and word about unprofessional treatment of customers tended to spread quickly through professional networks. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically as Derek realized the full scope of the situation. This wasn't just a complaint from a disgruntled customer, this was a business relationship issue with someone who had significant control over his company's operating environment. When Linda began discussing specific lease terms and renewal timelines, Derek's professional facade finally cracked and he began what sounded like genuine contrition mixed with desperate damage control. He called Jessica and the other salesperson into the office and asked me to repeat my account of the previous day's events. Watching their faces as they realized that the confused elderly woman they dismissed and mocked was actually their landlord was a masterclass in the consequences of making assumptions based on appearance. Jessica looked like she might cry. The other salesperson began stammering apologies, and Derek launched into a speech about retraining and policy revisions that sounded suspiciously like something he was making up on the spot. But the most satisfying moment came when Derek asked what he could do to make the situation right, clearly expecting that I would demand some form of financial compensation or public apology. Instead, I told him exactly what I wanted: a comprehensive review of their customer service policies, mandatory training for all staff on inclusive sales practices, and a commitment to treating every customer who walked through their doors with the same respect they would show their most valued client. I also requested quarterly reports on customer satisfaction and demographic data to ensure that improvements were being implemented and maintained. The conversation concluded with Derek agreeing to all my requests and promising immediate action on policy changes. As we prepared to leave, he made one final attempt to salvage the business relationship by offering me any car on the lot at cost, plus additional concessions that would have saved me thousands of dollars. I declined politely, explaining that I would be purchasing my vehicle elsewhere, but that I looked forward to seeing positive changes in how Prestige Motors served all customers in the future. Walking out of that dealership for the second time in 2 days felt completely different from my exit 24 hours earlier. The previous day, I'd left feeling humiliated and invisible, dismissed by people who saw only my age and appearance and made assumptions about my worth and capabilities. But this morning, I left feeling empowered and hopeful that my experience might prevent other elderly customers from facing similar treatment. I had used my position and resources not for revenge, but for education and change. The immediate aftermath of that confrontation was both satisfying and somewhat sad. Within hours, Derek Peterson called to inform me that Jessica and the other salesperson involved in the previous day's incident had been enrolled in sensitivity training. that new customer service protocols were being implemented immediately, and that he personally would be reaching out to other elderly customers to ensure they had received appropriate treatment. He also mentioned that the staff had been educated about the fact that customers' financial situations and backgrounds couldn't be determined by appearance alone. Over the following weeks, I received several follow-up calls from Derek, updating me on policy changes and training progress. Linda reported that other tenants in the automotive complex had commented on noticeable improvements in professionalism at Prestige Motors, and Margaret forwarded me positive online reviews from elderly customers who mentioned feeling respected and valued during their recent visits to the dealership. It seemed that my uncomfortable experience had indeed created positive change that benefited other customers. But the situation also highlighted something troubling about how society treats aging individuals, particularly women. The assumption that elderly people are confused, financially limited, or incapable of making independent decisions is pervasive and damaging. Throughout my years in business, I'd encountered this attitude countless times. But yesterday's experience was particularly egregious because it was so public and deliberate. It made me realize that despite all my success and financial independence, I wasn't immune to ageist discrimination. The personal cost of the confrontation was harder to measure. While I felt vindicated and empowered by standing up for myself and potentially helping other customers, I also felt a deep sadness about the state of customer service and human decency in general. The fact that it took revealing my financial power to earn basic respect was troubling, and it made me wonder how many other elderly individuals face similar treatment without having the resources or knowledge to fight back. In the months that followed, I made a point of visiting other businesses in my portfolio unannounced, observing how elderly customers were treated and addressing issues when I found them. I also began supporting local organizations that advocate for senior citizens' rights and funded customer service training programs for businesses throughout the region. My experience at Prestige Motors had taught me that fighting discrimination required ongoing vigilance and systematic change, not just individual confrontations. The relationship with Prestige Motors evolved into something surprisingly positive. Derek Peterson proved to be genuinely committed to change, implementing policies that became models for other dealerships in the region. 6 months after our confrontation, he invited me to speak at a regional automotive conference about inclusive customer service practices. I accepted, using the opportunity to share my story and encourage other business owners to examine their own assumptions about customers based on age, gender, and appearance. I did eventually buy a new car from a dealership across town that treated me with respect from the moment I walked through their doors. The salesperson, a woman in her 50s named Maria Gonzalez, listened to my needs, answered my questions without condescension, and completed the sale efficiently and professionally. When I mentioned that I was paying cash, she simply asked if I preferred a cashier's check or bank transfer, treating it as a normal business transaction rather than an unusual event requiring special verification or family consultation. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the power of standing up for yourself and the importance of using whatever resources you have to create positive change. It also reinforced my belief that respect should be given freely to all people, regardless of their age, appearance, or perceived economic status. Too often we make snap judgments about others based on limited information, and those judgments can cause real harm to real people who deserve better. Looking back on that day at Prestige Motors, I'm grateful for the reminder that my work isn't finished just because I've achieved personal success. There are still battles to be fought against discrimination and assumptions, still opportunities to educate and create change, and still reasons to use whatever power and influence I have to make the world a little more fair and respectful for everyone. If you've made it this far in my story, I want you to know that your age doesn't define your worth, your appearance doesn't determine your capabilities, and other people's assumptions about you don't have to become your reality. Whether you're facing discrimination in a car dealership, a restaurant, a store, or any other business, you have the right to be treated with dignity and respect. Don't let anyone make you feel invisible or unworthy because of how old you are or how you look. I've learned that standing up for yourself doesn't always require having the kind of business leverage I had in this situation. Sometimes it's as simple as speaking up when you're being treated poorly, asking to speak with a manager when staff members are dismissive, or taking your business elsewhere when a company doesn't value your patronage. Your money and your dignity are worth the same regardless of your age, and businesses that don't understand that don't deserve your loyalty. For those of you who work in customer service or sales, I want you to remember that every person who walks through your doors has a story, has value, and deserves your best effort. The elderly woman counting change at the register might be a retired CEO. The young person asking basic questions might be more knowledgeable about your products than you are. The family speaking a different language might be more financially capable than your most polished customers. Don't let assumptions rob you of the opportunity to provide excellent service and build genuine relationships with diverse customers. I also want to encourage anyone who has experienced similar treatment to share your story. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from, what happened to you, and how you handled it. Creating a community of people who understand these experiences helps all of us feel less alone and more empowered to demand the respect we deserve. Your voice matters, your experience is valid, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. The most important lesson from this experience is that we all have more power than we think we do. We have the power to choose where we spend our money, to speak up when we're treated poorly, to demand better from businesses that want our patronage, and to support companies that demonstrate genuine respect for all customers. We also have the power to examine our own biases and assumptions, to treat others with the dignity we want to receive, and to create positive change in our communities. As I continue enjoying my retirement years, driving my new car from a dealership that earned my business through excellent service, I'm reminded daily that getting older doesn't mean accepting less. If anything, reaching this stage of life has given me more confidence to speak up, more clarity about what matters, and more determination to use my experience and resources to make things better for others who might not have the same advantages I had in that situation. So subscribe if this story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and remember that your age is just a number, not a limitation. And whether you're 23 or 93, you deserve to be treated with respect, and you have the power to demand nothing less. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, and don't let assumptions about age or appearance determine how you're treated in this world. You're worth more than that, and it's time everyone learned to see it.